So we've got a mountain of stuff here, all about Barack Obama, and we're going to take a deep dive into this, extraordinary leader.
It's going to be good.
It's more than just politics, though, right? I mean,
absolutely.
we're talking about someone who really redefined what it means to be, presidential in the 21st century.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating how, like, his journey, from his upbringing to those pivotal moments in the White House, it all ties back to this idea of hope and the pursuit of change, right?
It's funny. When I think about Obama, the first thing that pops into my head isn't actually the Oval Office. It's that image of him, as a young community organizer on the south side of Chicago.
Yeah.
It's like, how did that guy become the leader of the free world?
That's a great place to start, actually.
Yeah.
Those early experiences working at the grassroots level, they really laid the foundation for his leadership style. The excerpts you sent from the Smart English podcast paint a really vivid picture of this period.
Oh, yeah. Those podcasts were gold.
Yeah.
They talked about how he was navigating these predominantly white spaces, grappling with his biracial identity, and trying to find his place in the world,
Yeah, it's crucial to understand that context.
Yeah.
Imagine the challenges he faced, not just as a young man trying to find his voice,
right,
but also as a Black man in America.
Yeah.
He even wrote about this in his book, Dreams from My Father.
Oh, right.
Those experiences likely made him incredibly adaptable, able to understand, different perspectives.
But that's the thing, right? He wasn't rooted in just one culture or worldview.
Right.
He had to build bridges between different parts of himself, which probably helped him connect with,
Absolute.
diverse groups later on.
Exactly. It's like his early experience of feeling like an outsider, of having to navigate multiple worlds, became a strength. It's a powerful reminder that our perceived weaknesses can often be our greatest assets.
It's amazing how those, formative years shaped him. Born in Hawaii,
Right.
This melting pot of cultures, raised primarily by his mother and grandparents.
Right.
You could see how that environment nurtured his sense of empathy and his ability to connect with people from all walks of life.
The podcast also highlighted his academic journey: Punahou School, Occidental College, then Columbia University, earning a degree in political science.
Oh.
It's clear he had a sharp mind and a thirst for knowledge.
But he didn't just hit the books.
No.
He was passionate about basketball, too. It's like he was always striving for excellence, whether on the court or in the classroom.
And that drive continued when he moved to Chicago.
Yeah.
Instead of taking a traditional path after graduation, he chose to work as a community organizer.
Right.
That's where we really see his commitment to social justice taking shape.
It wasn't just a job for him, was it? It was about making a tangible difference in people's lives.
Right.
The podcast mentioned how he helped local churches and community groups address issues like job discrimination and lack of health care access.
He was getting his hands dirty, understanding the needs of people on the ground level.
Yeah.
It wasn't about theory. It was about action. And that's a key part of his leadership style, that deep empathy and connection with everyday people.
It makes me think, how many future presidents do you know who spent years, walking the streets, listening to people's struggles, and working alongside them to create change?
Very few, if any.
Right.
And I think that those years as a community organizer were crucial in shaping his approach to leadership.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like that experience laid the groundwork for everything that came later.
Exactly.
From his time in the Illinois State Senate to his groundbreaking healthcare reform as president.
He wasn't just theorizing about solutions from an ivory tower.
Right.
He had lived those challenges. He had seen the impact firsthand.
Okay, but let's be real. Community organizing is a world away from, Harvard Law School.
That's true.
How did he make that leap?
Well, you can't deny his intellect. He excelled at Harvard Law, even becoming the first Black president of the Harvard Law Review. Pretty amazing.
QGE, right? Not just a personal achievement, but a testament to his ability to lead and inspire in a prestigious and probably pretty intense environment.
Absolutely. It honed his skills in negotiation, debate, and legal thinking. And remember, this is Harvard Law we're talking about. It's a breeding ground for future leaders, and he clearly thrived there.
It's funny because after all that, he didn't jump straight into politics or a high-powered law firm.
Yeah.
He chose to return to Chicago as a civil rights attorney and a constitutional law professor.
He was drawn to roles where he could make a difference, where he could influence future generations of leaders. Imagine being one of his law students, soaking up his insights on civil rights and constitutional law. Talk about an inspiring mentor.
It's like he was constantly seeking out opportunities to learn, to grow, and to use his knowledge to empower others.
Right.
And in 1996, he takes that experience and steps into the world of politics, winning a seat in the Illinois State Senate.
This is where we start to see his political acumen in action. He quickly earned a reputation as the consensus builder, someone who could work across the aisle to get things done. He tackled complex issues like healthcare, education, and civil rights, always focused on finding solutions that benefited everyone.
And you can see how those early experiences shaped his approach.
Absolutely.
He wasn't just focused on winning political points. He was genuinely trying to improve people's lives.
Right.
It's that authenticity that really resonated with voters.
His rise through the ranks was remarkable, from state senator to giving the keynote address at the 2004 Democratic National Convention.
Well, yeah.
His message of unity and hope captivated the nation.
Oh, man.
Remember that iconic "Yes, we can" slogan?
Shells. That speech wasn't just about politics. It was about tapping into the American spirit, reminding us of our shared values and the power of possibility.
It was a turning point in his career, propelling him onto the national stage and setting the stage for his historic presidential run in 2007.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Yes.
His campaign was unlike anything we'd ever seen before.
It really was.
It was powered by grassroots fundraising,
Absolutely.
social media engagement, and this incredible energy.
It was palpable.
Especially among young voters.
He was the first social media president, for sure. He understood how to connect with people in a new way.
Yeah.
To build a movement that transcended traditional political boundaries.
But let's not forget, the road to the White House wasn't easy.
Oh, no.
He faced a fierce primary battle against Hillary Clinton.
Right.
It was a real test of his resilience and his ability to connect with voters on an emotional level.
That primary was a crucible. It forced him to sharpen his message, to hone his debating skills, and to demonstrate his ability to lead under pressure.
Yeah.
And he emerged from that contest stronger, more prepared for the general election.
And then, on November 4th, 2008, history was made.
It was an incredible moment.
Barack Obama became the first African-American president of the United States.
It was a moment of immense joy and celebration, a testament to how far we'd come as a nation.
It was more than just an American story, though, right?
Absolutely.
People around the world were watching, inspired by this symbol of hope and progress.
It was a global phenomenon.
Obama's victory was a powerful affirmation that America was truly a land of opportunity, a place where anyone, regardless of their background, could achieve their dreams.
His acceptance speech in Grant Park, Chicago was just electric.
Oh, yeah.
That message of hope and optimism for the future, it was exactly what the country needed after years of division and uncertainty. It felt like a new chapter was beginning.
It was a call to action.
It was.
Obama wasn't just celebrating victory. He was challenging Americans to come together, to roll up their sleeves and work towards building a better future. It was a powerful message that resonated far beyond that night in Grant Park. But let's be honest, he didn't exactly inherit a rosy situation.
No, he did not.
Just a few months after taking office, he was faced with the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression.
It was a dire situation.
The country was in dire straits, and the world was watching to see how he would respond.
This is where his leadership was truly tested.
Yeah.
He inherited a collapsing economy, 2 ongoing wars, and a deeply divided nation.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good. It's fascinating to consider, like, the weight of the world, you know?
Yeah.
On his shoulders as he stepped into the Oval Office, we left off with Obama facing a monumental task, rescuing an economy in free fall.
You're telling me? The Great Recession was no joke.
It was a tough time.
People were losing their homes, their jobs, their savings.
Yeah.
It felt like the whole system was on the verge of collapse.
And he had to act decisively.
Right.
Remember, the world was watching? The Smart English podcast actually had an episode about this, highlighting how Obama's response to the crisis shaped global perceptions of American leadership.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
They talked about how he implemented the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act.
Yeah.
A massive stimulus package aimed at jump-starting the economy.
It was a bold move,
Okay.
a combination of tax cuts, infrastructure spending, and aid to struggling industries.
Right.
And it was controversial, with critics arguing it was too expensive or that it didn't go far enough.
But you have to consider the context, right?
Yeah.
The economy was in a tailspin.
Absolutely.
Doing nothing wasn't an option.
No.
You had to try something and fast.
Exactly. And while the Recovery Act wasn't a magic bullet, most economists agree that it helped prevent a complete meltdown and laid the groundwork for economic recovery.
It's interesting how that decision set the tone for his entire presidency. He was willing to take risks, to make tough choices,
Yeah,
even when they weren't popular.
absolutely. And speaking of tough choices, let's talk about healthcare reform. The Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare,
Right.
was arguably his most ambitious domestic policy initiative.
You know, I remember those debates.
Oh, yeah.
It felt like the whole country was arguing about healthcare.
It was a highly contentious issue.
Yeah.
And it still is.
Right.
But Obama was determined to expand healthcare coverage and make it more affordable for millions of Americans.
The podcast I sent mentioned how he drew on his experiences as a community organizer, seeing firsthand how lack of healthcare devastated families.
That's right. He brought that personal perspective to the White House.
Yeah.
He understood the human cost of a broken healthcare system.
Okay, so remind me, what were the key provisions of the ACA? It feels like a lifetime ago.
Well, the goal was to expand coverage and slow the growth of healthcare costs.
Okay.
Some key elements included requiring most Americans to have health insurance, providing subsidies to help people afford it,
Right.
and preventing insurance companies from denying coverage for pre-existing conditions.
Oh, yeah, that pre-existing condition thing was huge. I remember hearing stories of people being denied coverage for things like asthma or diabetes.
It was a major victory for those with chronic illnesses. And the ACA also expanded Medicaid,
Okay.
providing coverage to millions more low-income Americans.
But it didn't come easy, did it? The Republicans fought it tooth and nail.
It faced fierce opposition, both in Congress and in the courts. There were legal challenges, repeal attempts, and a constant barrage of criticism.
Yet, despite all that, it became law.
It did.
And millions of Americans gained health insurance.
It was a testament to Obama's perseverance, his ability to navigate a complex political landscape and achieve a major legislative victory.
It's interesting how this one piece of legislation became such a defining part of his legacy.
It speaks to the power of ideas, the impact of political will, and the enduring debate about the role of government in healthcare.
And it wasn't just domestic policy that kept him busy. He had 2 wars to manage, a global financial crisis to navigate, and a whole host of foreign policy challenges.
You're right. He inherited the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and had to make some tough calls about how to wind them down responsibly.
The podcast I sent you had a whole episode on his handling of the Iraq War and how he ultimately oversaw the withdrawal of U.S. troops.
It was a complex situation with no easy answers.
Yeah.
But he was committed to ending the war and bringing our troops home.
And Afghanistan was a whole other beast.
It was.
The war dragged on for years, and there were no clear solutions.
It was a constant struggle, balancing the need to combat terrorism with the desire to avoid a prolonged military engagement.
It's easy to criticize his decisions from the comfort of our armchairs.
Yeah.
But you have to imagine the pressure he was under.
Absolutely. He was dealing with life or death decisions with global implications.
It's amazing how he managed to stay so level-headed amidst all that chaos.
He did.
The podcast I sent really highlighted his calm demeanor and his thoughtful approach to decision-making.
Those qualities were essential in navigating the complexities of foreign policy. He understood the nuances of diplomacy and the importance of building coalitions.
He wasn't a shoot first, ask questions later kind of guy.
Right.
He preferred a more measured, deliberate approach.
And that was evident in his handling of other foreign policy challenges, like the Iranian nuclear program and the Syrian civil war.
Those were incredibly complex situations with no easy solutions.
Yeah, they were.
But he was committed to diplomacy and finding peaceful resolutions whenever possible.
He also made some bold moves, like opening up relations with Cuba after decades of hostility.
That was a major shift in U.S. policy.
It was.
And it took a lot of courage to go against the grain.
It demonstrated his willingness to challenge the status quo and pursue a different course in foreign policy.
You know, as we're talking about this, it's striking how much he accomplished in just 2 terms.
It is.
The ACA, ending the Iraq War, opening up relations with Cuba, tackling climate change with the Paris Agreement.
Right.
The list goes on.
It's a testament to his work ethic, his vision, and his ability to mobilize people around a common purpose.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, right?
Hmm.
He faced constant opposition from Republicans in Congress, and the political climate became increasingly polarized during his presidency.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
He was operating in a highly partisan environment,
Right.
which made it incredibly difficult to achieve his goals.
The podcast mentioned how the rise of the Tea Party movement and the increasing influence of social media contributed to that polarization.
It was a perfect storm of factors that made governing incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
Even with a clear mandate from the people, he had to contend with a Congress that was often unwilling to compromise.
It must have been frustrating knowing what you want to achieve, but being constantly blocked by political gridlock.
It was a test of his patience and his ability to find common ground. He had to make concessions, to compromise, even when it meant alienating some of his supporters.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful person in the world can't always get what they want.
And it raises important questions about the nature of power, the limits of presidential authority, and the challenges of governing in a divided democracy.
You know, listening to you talk about his presidency, I'm struck by how much he accomplished despite all the obstacles he faced.
He was a remarkable leader, no doubt about it. But his legacy extends beyond specific policies or achievements.
Right.
It's about the way he inspired people, the way he shifted the national conversation, and the way he redefined what it means to be presidential in the 21st century.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
How did he redefine the presidency?
Yeah.
What makes his time in office so unique?
Well, for one, he embraced technology in a way that no president had before.
Right.
Remember how his campaign revolutionized the use of social media?
Absolutely. It was like he was speaking directly to people.
Yeah.
Bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of the media.
And he continued that approach as president.
Yeah.
He used social media to connect with voters, to share his message, and to build a movement.
He understood the power of storytelling, of connecting with people on an emotional level.
His speeches were masterclasses in rhetoric. He could weave together personal anecdotes, historical references, and powerful calls to action, creating a narrative that resonated with people from all walks of life.
You're making me want to go back and watch some of his speeches. Do you have a favorite?
Oh, it's hard to choose just one.
Yeah.
But his speech on race in America, delivered during the 2008 campaign, was particularly powerful.
Yeah.
He tackled a complex and sensitive issue with nuance and honesty.
I remember that speech. It felt like a turning point in our national conversation about race.
It was.
He didn't shy away from difficult topics.
Yeah.
He embraced them.
He challenged us to confront our biases, to acknowledge our shared history, and to strive for a more just and equitable society.
And he did it all with this incredible grace and eloquence. He had a way of making you feel like you were part of something bigger than yourself.
He inspired a generation, particularly young people and minorities, who saw themselves reflected in his story.
He showed them that anything is possible, that change is within reach, and that their voices matter.
And that's a powerful legacy.
Yeah.
It's about more than just policies or achievements. It's about the way he made people feel, the hope he ignited, and the belief he instilled in the power of collective action.
You know, as we're talking about this, I'm realizing how much he changed the expectations for what a president can be.
He raised the bar in terms of communication, in terms of engagement, in terms of representation.
He showed that a president can be both intellectual and relatable.
Absolutely.
Both serious and funny, both a policy wonk and a master storyteller.
And that's a legacy that continues to shape the presidency today.
Okay, I'm hooked. I want to dive deeper into this idea of his legacy.
Yeah.
How has his presidency influenced those who came after him? What are the lasting impacts of his time in office?
That's a great question, and one we should definitely explore further.
Yeah.
But before we do, let's take a moment to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
I'm listening. What's on your mind?
Remember how we talked about Obama's experience as a community organizer and how it shaped his approach to leadership?
Yeah, it was like that experience gave him a deep understanding of people's struggles.
Right.
And a desire to find practical solutions.
I think it's worth revisiting that idea in the context of his presidency.
Okay.
How did that early experience manifest itself in his policies, in his decisions, in his interactions with the American people?
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
Yeah.
It's like we're connecting the dots between his past and his presidency.
Exactly. And I think it will help us understand the motivations behind his actions and the lasting impact of his leadership.
Okay. Lead the way. I'm ready to follow this thread.
Well, let's start by looking at the Affordable Care Act. Remember how we discussed the key provisions, the goals of expanding coverage and making health care more affordable?
Yeah, it was a massive undertaking.
It was.
And incredibly complex.
Now, imagine you're Barack Obama sitting in the Oval Office, trying to figure out how to tackle this challenge.
Right.
You've got experts advising you, lobbyists pushing their agendas, and a whole nation watching your every move.
It must have been overwhelming.
And yet he managed to navigate that complexity and push through a landmark piece of legislation.
Yeah.
And I think his experience as a community organizer played a crucial role in that process.
How so? I'm curious to hear your take on
Well,
this.
think about the skills he developed as an organizer.
Mm.
Listening to people's concerns, building relationships,
Evan.
finding common ground,
Yeah.
and mobilizing people around a shared goal.
Those are essential leadership skills, regardless of the setting.
Exactly. And I think those skills were invaluable in getting the ACA passed.
Yeah.
He had to build coalitions, negotiate with stakeholders, and persuade skeptics.
Right.
He had to connect with the American people and convince them that this was a fight worth having.
It's like he was organizing a movement, but on a national scale.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. He was bringing people together, not just to pass a law, but to create a more just and equitable healthcare system.
And it wasn't just the ACA. I bet we could find examples of this throughout his presidency.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
His approach to climate change,
Right.
his efforts to reform Wall Street, his focus on education.
Yeah.
I bet if we look closely, we'll see the fingerprints of his community organizing days all over his presidency.
This is fascinating. It's like we're uncovering a hidden layer of his leadership style.
And I think it's a reminder that our past experiences, even those that seem far removed from our current roles, can have a profound impact on how we approach challenges and lead others.
Okay, I'm sold. Let's dive deeper into this connection between his community organizing and his presidency. Where do we start?
Well, let's pick a specific policy area and see if we can trace those threads. How about climate change? It was a major focus of his second term.
Perfect. I actually sent you a couple of articles that analyze his climate change policies. Excellent. We can use those as a starting point to see how his community organizing experience informed his approach to this global challenge.
All right, lead the way. I'm ready to explore this connection. Okay, so we're looking at Obama's approach to climate change. And I'm ready to see how these community organizing roots show up here.
Yeah, climate change is this massive global issue, right?
It is.
It feels almost too big to even grasp,
Totally. Like, how do you even begin to tackle something that affects the entire planet?
And yet, Obama made it a priority.
Yeah.
He understood the urgency of the crisis and the need for bold action.
One of the articles I sent you highlighted his efforts to reduce carbon emissions through regulations on power plants.
Yeah.
That was a big deal, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The Clean Power Plan was a landmark initiative aiming to reduce emissions from power plants by 32% from 2005 levels by 2030.
32%. That's huge.
It is.
But didn't it face a ton of pushback?
It did.
Yeah.
There were legal challenges from states and industry groups arguing that the EPA had overstepped its authority.
So how did Obama navigate that opposition? Did his community organizing skills come into play here?
I think they did. Remember, as an organizer, he was constantly building coalitions, bringing people together around a common goal.
Right.
He was a master negotiator, finding ways to bridge divides and forge compromises.
And with the Clean Power Plan, he had to do the same thing on a national scale.
Exactly. He had to work with states, with industry leaders, with environmental groups to find a solution that addressed the climate crisis while also considering economic concerns.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It was, and it required those same skills he honed as a community organizer.
Yeah.
Listening to different perspectives, building consensus, and finding creative solutions.
One of the articles I sent you mentioned how Obama framed climate change as a moral issue, not just an environmental one.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
He understood the human impact of climate change, the way it disproportionately affects vulnerable communities around the world.
He talked about it in terms of our responsibility to future generations, our obligation to leave behind a healthy planet.
And that moral framing resonated with people. It wasn't just about data and science. It was about values and our shared humanity.
Like he was bringing that community organizing approach to the global stage, building a movement for climate action.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
He was trying to mobilize people, not just in the United States, but around the world, to address this shared threat.
And one of his biggest achievements on this front was the Paris Agreement, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Paris Agreement was a historic agreement bringing together nearly 200 countries to commit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
It felt like a turning point in the global fight against climate change.
Yeah.
Like we were finally starting to take this crisis seriously.
And Obama played a key role in making that happen.
Yeah.
He used his diplomatic skills, his ability to build relationships and foster trust to bring countries together around a common goal.
It's easy to forget how much work went on behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah.
The countless hours of negotiations.
Yeah.
The compromises that had to be made.
But Obama persevered.
Yeah.
He understood the stakes, and he was determined to leave a lasting legacy on this issue.
And I think he did.
I agree.
The Paris Agreement, even with its flaws, is a testament to his leadership and his commitment to addressing the climate crisis.
It's a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, progress is possible.
Yeah.
It takes vision, it takes courage, and it takes a willingness to bring people together.
And, as we wrap up this deep dive into Obama's life and legacy, I'm struck by the power of his story.
Yeah.
It's a story about hope,
It is.
about change, about the possibility of achieving great things, even when the odds are stacked against you.
It's a story that continues to inspire people around the world.
Totally.
And it's a story that reminds us that we all have a role to play in shaping a better future.
A huge thank you to you for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From his early days as a community organizer to his groundbreaking presidency and beyond.
And remember, the exploration doesn't end here.
Okay.
Keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and keep seeking out those nuggets of knowledge that spark your curiosity.
Beautifully said. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring the world with open minds and open hearts.
Mm-hmm.